Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that takes a look at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode of Ash, as he gave us some insight in the various roles he has undertaken and the magical world of Candle Corner. Today's guest, Alex Frost, who is Head of Production Finance, joins us to talk about the accounting side of TV. His credits include Adult Material, Fortitude, and Curfew. So make yourself comfortable as we jump into the conversation with Alex. Welcome, Frosty. How's it all going with you?
It's hi Rob. I'm very well, thank you. Dealing with lockdown is interesting, to say the least. I think I'm probably, as I said before, one of the luckier ones within production. Whilst we've been on lockdown, I think probably finance people have perhaps been the ones that have been working the most since everyone got stuck at home, having to do cash flows and everything else, all the boring stuff.
It's kind of funny you mentioned about being locked down, because this really dates the episode. Because like, if somebody goes back to it, whatever, a year's time, and they'll be like, wow, this is a bit of a time capsule, isn't it?
It is a little bit. It is.
Just like dated this. But no, it's good because at least we'll have a nice little memory of what we were doing on this date.
I know. I keep putting stuff into my diary and thinking when I look back at my diary in a year's time or something, it's just going to be completely empty of what did I do this weekend? Nothing. I went for a walk. And looking at the things I should be doing. But no, it's been good. Funnily enough, I've actually been really, speaking to my boss, I've been really, really busy, but it's not the work that I want to do, sort of thing, since we've been in lockdown. I think that's one of the things I've noticed.
I guess that's a good segue you've just sorted out there by, I guess you're describing what is it that you actually do? Because I know you started out as a production accountant in-house, but you've recently moved to another company.
Yeah, so I was various things, but I started off, wanted to get into TV, and I started off doing sort of management, accounts assistant, I'd say, at Tiger Aspect, assisting within the management accounts and doing various sort of junior-ish roles. But I always wanted to get into the TV production side. Having spoken to people, not really having a background in accounts, I kind of fell into it slightly. And speaking to people at Tiger Aspect at the time, I was told that there is a kind of a shortage of production accountants, whereas people kind of want to go into the more sexier roles within production. I suppose is the best way to call it. It's, the cameramen or, things like that, ADs and producers and directors, those sorts of roles. When you say production accountant, it's probably doesn't sound like the most interesting of things, but is actually quite vital. So I kind of I've been very, very lucky actually, and Tiger are always very good to me that I was a production accountant there ended up being 15 years and doing loads of different genres. After getting to a certain point within it, I came to the point of thinking, okay, do I want to go freelance or do something else? And then, strangely enough, out of the blue, someone who I'd worked with at Tiger, who had gone to set up their own independent, I'd worked with her very closely before on a couple of big dramas that we'd done at Tiger Aspect, who she contacted me and said that their independent was becoming busier and busier. They had a lot in development and she needed someone to come in and help with the finance side. Now, the new role is quite a bit similar to being how I was in-house at Tiger. And it's mostly the funding side of the production. So my boss would essentially work out the funding that we're going to get with the BBC or Amazon or Sky or whoever it happened to be. And I would then break that down to make sure that the production can run each month, has enough money to run each month, and also help secure the tax credits against the production and also secure bank loans as well. So, because the tax credits, we don't get tax credits until the end of the shoot. So you have to take a bank loan out against those tax credits. So I'm still learning the job. I was just getting my feet under the table sort of thing. And then we all got put into lockdown, which slowed things up slightly. And I've probably spent the last 8 weeks arranging furlough of various people. And I'm only now just getting back onto what my actual job entails. So it's different to production accounts, but it's using the same sort of information that I used to use.
So going back to your beginnings, if I remember right, you started off at another company in accounts where they weren't bailiffs, they were
Liquidations.
So.
Insolvency practitioners is the exact word I suppose you'd want to call it. So yes, I again fell into it, took a job there for a year whilst I decided what I wanted to do with my future after my A-levels. Wanted to be out of school for a while and got a job there as an office junior for a year. Again, was pretty lucky actually, because after a year of being there, someone was leaving and they kind of said to me, you know, after my year was up, would you like to take over this person's position? Now, again, it was office junior role, but I had a very good boss there and he was very trusting of me, and he sort of took me under his wing and helped let me do casework for liquidations and bankruptcies and things like that. But after a number of years I was enjoying the money that I earned there, sort of being in my early 20s and earning very good money and still sort of living at home with my parents was great. And actually when they offered me the job, I thought, stuff university, I'm going to carry on earning. I ended up being there for about 5 years. After about 4 years, realized that it wasn't for me, having sort of men in their 50s and 60s, older and younger, crying in front of me because they'd lost everything. Just didn't appeal to me anymore. And I had this yearning that I wanted to work in TV. It was one of the things I'd always wanted to do. I'd always wanted to work in TV, film and TV, but had no idea what I wanted to do in film and TV. So yeah, so that was sort of the first 5 years.
Your skills from the liquidators transfer over, to when you started your first job at Tiger?
I think so, yeah, because in fact, that's one of the reasons Tiger sort of took me on when I had the interview with them, because I didn't have an accounts qualification as such, but they needed an accounts assistant, just someone in-house, you know, doing with the corporate accounts, nothing to do with production. It was all corporate stuff. So because I'd done that work in liquidations, I had a bit of a background with certain things to help them. And to be honest, the first part of Tiger, being an accounts assistant, was paying the invoices, doing the check run, doing bank statements, direct debits, and, you know, those sorts of general bits and pieces, all things that, because I'd worked in an insolvency firm with a bit of an accounts knowledge, helped what I was doing. But then also I think that doing that account stuff within Tiger also then helped me for when I then transitioned over to production accounts as well.
What was the sort of difference that you found once you sort of went to production accountants? The difference between working in-house and working on a production itself, whilst it's all in full swing?
As in, so when I was a production accountant, I mean, everything I did was sort of in-house. Are you talking about when I left Tiger? Or?
No. As in when you started working on shoots themselves.
Oh, sorry. So I'm actually going from being an accounts assistant to sort of production accounts.
Yes,
difference
yes.
there. I mean, a lot more interesting. I mean, it's probably, it sounds bad, but it's a hell of a lot more interesting. One of the things I didn't like about, you know, after being at Tiger for a few years and doing corporate accounts there and helping out with the corporate accounts, I got to the point, like I did at my old firm, where I was enjoying being at the company. It wasn't that, but I wasn't enjoying the work I was doing. And to be honest, again, at Tiger at that point, I was looking at my options, thinking I don't want to be doing corporate accounts for the rest of my life. Because the thing about corporate accounts within a company like Tiger and most other companies, you have a deadline of when you've got to do things by. So almost the work that you're doing each day, you're doing that same amount of work each day of each month. So the first of month, you know, you've got to get this done. The second of month, you know, you've got to get this done. And it's almost exactly the same sort of thing, which is boring. I found quite boring. So sorry, when I moved over, I found, the corporate account stuff was very repetitive and wasn't really, strictly speaking, it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be on the production. Again, as I said, I was very lucky, again, within Tiger, that at the time that I was umming and ahhing about my career, I had been helping out, doing a few little development bits and pieces, just kind of doing a bit of work on the development side at Tiger, just, you know, the money they've had it and what they've spent. And I was helping the head of drama out a little bit on that. So they needed an in-house production accountant, which I applied for, and I got the job. Now, I was incredibly lucky that the guy who was sort of head of production accounts at the time, a man called George Cashel, very, very good production accountant who knew a lot, sort of took me under his wing and sort of really showed me the ropes. And it was for me, the different thing I liked about it was it got me out of the office. So in corporate accounts, you're sitting in the office 9 to 5 every single day. You've almost got a timetable of what you've got to get done each day. But when it comes to production accounts, you've got to set things that has to be done, but anything can happen regarding the production. Everything looks absolutely fine and hunky-dory one day on the production, and then it just spiral completely out of control the next day. And it was that thing of having to keep you on your toes and getting out of the office and being able to travel around and seeing how the programs are made sort of really sparked my interest in the whole thing, basically, and made it much more exciting.
When you started out going out of the office, what was the sort of biggest shock that you could have found working out of the office compared to in the office?
Much more. Well, productions are a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. It's not boring working in an office. It really isn't. The offices at Tiger were great, and one of the reasons I stayed there for so long was because of the company itself. And I absolutely loved the company there for a very, very long time. It's just the management of your own time. For some strange reason, I loved the long hours that I used to do on the production. It kind of shocked me how hard everybody worked as well. They really put the time and effort into it, and everyone worked really, really hard. But also, I think one of the things that shocked me greatly was, I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way, was the attitudes between people on production and the people in offices, and the differences between what people expect when they're on a production compared to what people would expect in an office. That was, and actually that shocked me most of the way through my career, I think.
As in, like, the certain standards that are set. Is that what you were sort of saying?
I think so, yeah. There's certain standards, but also, I try not to be rude the way I say this, but what people expect when they're on productions that they would never get in a normal office, I think shocked me quite a lot and carried on shocking me for quite some time. But it was that initial thing of, the first ever job I did was an entertainment show called Dirty Laundry, which was a kind of chat show about teens sort of, sitting around a studio chatting to two presenters about various problems and issues happening with teens. And that was, I think, the first ever show I did for Channel 4. And I just sort of remember turning up and sitting there in the gallery and hearing people's wants and what they needed and how people spoke to each other at times. And I was a little bit like, oh my goodness, okay, this is a bit different from being in an office, go and get me my lunch or something like that. I want this and I want that. And some of the things that were requested, I think I was quite shocked at.
Were you secretly thinking like, oh, I kind of hope I can get in on this deal? Oh, if they're getting them lunch, maybe they can get me.
I wouldn't say that I haven't been party to perhaps some of it over time. I think it's one of those things that becomes ingrained within production. But I have this thing, I know we're not quite talking about this yet, but I always have this slight theory, and this is my background working in production accounts, so seeing an overview of the whole production and having worked in an office, I do sometimes think that certain people on productions, I wouldn't say everybody, most people are absolutely fine, but I do think some people on productions could do with working in an office 9 to 5 and seeing the differences of things. And
the slice of gossip though.
Well, yes. But I think you'd find a lot of production accountants would say exactly the same thing. I'm definitely not the only person that sort of thinks that. And I think it comes from an office sort of thing. You're going from an office to a production, and you definitely see that shock. But also, it was that whole how exciting everything was. It was that massively. I just found being on a production just so exciting to be on. It was great. It was really good fun.
Yeah, I think it's also when you start out and you realise that you start to get like a free lunch, you get catering. That's always a slippery slope in terms of just like, oh wow.
It is. It's funny because when you do start out in production, this is exactly the sort of point. When I first started on my very first shoot, and it's like, right, lunch is called, and you go down and you're like, oh my, what? Okay. And you pile your plate in the, as high as you can possibly pile it. And you start off with going, this is incredible, this is amazing. And then, by the time you get to your third and fourth production, you're like, oh, this catering isn't very good. Other caterers were much, much better. Well, last time we had chips and these people didn't do chips. It's that sort of thing. And I think people are very quick to forget that actually normal offices, you go out and buy your own sandwich or you bring your own sandwich in, yeah, there are a lot of stories.
And you started doing a lot of comedies, and then you started moving to more bigger budget shows. What was your time in comedy like, and what sort of trials and tribulations did you have to go through?
I mean, again, at Tiger, I was very, very lucky. It's a multi-genre company. So I was, again, one of the reasons I stayed there so long is because I was able to start off in sort of entertainment animation, and even factual stuff, just very sort of low budget. Animation was quite easy because it was done in-house. So I was very lucky, very, very lucky that they had some small productions that I was able to do and learn. And as I was going along, doing entertainment shows at sort of £500,000. I mean, the animation, which was Charlie and Lola, was a much bigger show, but it was very easy because as long as everything hit their targets regarding the animation, it was a relatively easy show. Tiger is well known for its comedy. It was one of the things that when I went for the interview there, one of the things I was really excited about was Tiger Aspect. They're known for Harry Enfield, Vicar of Dibley, Catherine Tate. Those were the shows that were going on before I was even there, when I first started. And I was, again, very lucky that I started working on entertainment stuff. I became very good friends with the head of production for comedy and entertainment at Tiger. I think production is very much a thing that when you get in with someone that you're friendly with and they know you and they trust you, then they ask you constantly to come back and keep doing more productions with them. So I was very lucky that this head of production, I did, I think probably one production. I remember doing I think it was a Lenny Henry pilot that we were doing, and I did that, and he liked how I'd done the work. So he then said, oh, okay, I'd like you to do the Catherine Tate show. And then I ended up doing more and more. And I ended up being in comedy for quite some time. My time in comedy was probably one of the best years of my working life, without hopefully insulting anybody. I loved it. But I loved it. I loved working in comedy, partly because I grew up watching and loving shows like Harry Enfield and loving comedy, Blackadder and things like that. I was obsessed with them. And so for me, working in comedy was the pinnacle of what I wanted to do. I really, really wanted to do it. And I loved it. I was able to work on some great things. I worked on 4 series of Harry Enfield, Harry and Paul, which is challenging in itself because you have 2 top comedians who know what they want and have their demands. And you're also out on location and out in studio for a period of time. So it's only a 6-week shoot, but it's a very, very challenging 6-week shoot of a different location every single day. The same with Catherine Tate and working on something. I was very lucky to work on the last ever 2 episodes of Vicar of Dibley. Coming in and working on a show as established as that and as big as that, and seeing the egos involved in that. And I'm not even talking about the cast. Sort of the head of productions, not head of productions, the head of departments, egos within that were almost bigger than the cast members, it was hard work, but actually I didn't really see it as hard work when I was working in comedy because I just enjoyed it so much. I didn't care about having to work really long hours because I just enjoyed it. I would get up every morning in those comedy years. I remember my wife getting annoyed with me because I would get up in the morning looking forward to go to work. It's a weird thing. It really is weird, but I can't, it's quite a strange thing, but I just loved those years working in the comedy at Tiger. Everyone, we got on really well. I knew the head of production and the line producers very well, and we had a very good trust together. And I made some friends during those comedy years that I've still got to this day, and I worked on things that really gave me skills for doing bigger shows. There are shows like Benidorm, which is kind of looked at as, it's just a comedy, it's a sitcom. But when you're looking at what goes into Benidorm and the time and trouble it takes sorting out, just sorting out apartments for cast and crew out in Spain, sorting out the logistics of everything, you take that knowledge that you learn on those smaller comedies, and then all you're doing for larger productions, it's just multiplying it, in my opinion. So I've always had this theory that you can do those comedies and things like that, then actually you can do dramas just as easily, in my opinion.
Well, I wanted to get onto Benidorm because you did a number of years on that show. and a lot of it is based in another country. What was that like, being away from like the sort of your home base? Because you kind of not have that freedom, but because there is a small time difference, so you're kind of, I guess, left to play with your own devices for like an hour or so before people get back to you. But then also, what was it like being away from your family and everything else for so long?
It's an interesting one. I always remember I did Benidorm on and off pretty much from series 2 through to about series 8, and sort of ended up, I don't want to blow my own trumpet here, but sort of ended up setting up virtually all of the processes. They had a production accountant for series 1. She didn't want to come back and do series 2. Well, I had, because I was in-house, she was freelance. She left after series 1 and I kind of finished off the post. So I had a little bit of understanding when I was asked to do series 2. I was very lucky when I was asked to do series 2. It was only half hours, but also they had asked my wife, who was a teacher at the time, if she would like to be a tutor for the young boy that is on it. So I was quite lucky the first series I did that I was out there with my wife working on it. I worked on it with people I already knew. The line producer I'd worked with at Tiger for quite some time, so I was good friends with her. So I do remember the first time I went out there on series 2, kind of standing out there, and I'd only done sort of some Catherine Tates and Harry and Paul's and stuff like that. And I've gone to do this thing, Benidorm in Spain. And I remember getting out there and being in the hotel as clear as day and standing on the balcony and looking out and going, my God, am I actually going to be able to do this? Is this sort of, have I bitten off more than I can chew? Because all of a sudden you're having to think about sterling costs and euro costs, and you're dealing with a production services company in Spain, but also Tiger as well. Again, I was incredibly lucky that I had a very good support system back at Tiger to help me with all of these things. The head of production at the time was brilliant. My boss at the time at Tiger was just as supportive. And actually, I think it's one of those things you find out that when you can do certain productions, you can do others. Yeah, it's incredibly challenging working out in Spain, but also really it's not that much different. You just have to get used to the other way of life, of how they deal with things. You know, you're working in a small town in Benidorm, which isn't like Madrid or Barcelona. It's not set up for filming. So you have to find a way around those things. You have to troubleshoot a lot more. So you have to kind of think, okay, we're in Spain. We can't get that equipment that we need like that we would normally get in the UK. So you have to think about things a lot more. Being away from your family, again, the first series, my wife was out with me. So, you know, the first series I did, she was out with me. After that, it gets quite difficult. You kind of find yourself in this production bubble that we used to call it, where you don't forget about your life at home, but your work becomes the sole concentration for everything you're doing. So because you're out in Spain, because you're not going home to your family at the end of the day, or back to your own house at the end of the day, I would end up working longer hours and wouldn't really care too much. So, I mean, as you mentioned, the time difference, that is something that's quite frustrating, especially when you're out in Spain. And I'm sure it's even harder in other countries because, for example, if, as a silly thing, the network goes down. So say we're filming, you know, we're in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is 7 o'clock in the morning in the UK. Now, if, for example, the network goes down in England and I can't log into the cost manager, I can't do anything. I literally can't do anything. And you're sitting there and you're having to wait till 9 o'clock UK time, 10 o'clock Spanish time for someone to come in the office and get stuff done. That is the frustrating part of it. But saying that, it happens a fraction of the time. What you're more get frustrated about working in a foreign country is not having the level of speed, in my opinion. And this isn't anything to do with Spain, it's other countries as well. England is so set up for high-end TV filming, not just high-end, but for TV filming in general. You need a piece of equipment, you call someone up, it's there, courier's done, you get it. When you're working in a different country, you are dealing with a country that possibly doesn't have the sort of equipment like we have in the UK. They don't have the camera lenses that we need, lights, sound equipment, even anything like that, even stuff the location department would want. Location signs is a great example. Even getting location signs made up in some countries just takes too long and they don't quite understand what you need, and so you end up getting them shipped over from the UK. I think those are probably the frustrations, It's not the time difference it's having to deal with. And I'm not saying those countries are bad at filming. They're not at all. But we have things more set up in the UK than other countries do, in my opinion. Other countries are catching up, but I feel that we are far away ahead of a lot of other places. Yeah, so yes.
I wanted to go back, because you mentioned about having a sterling cost and euro cost.
Yes.
How hard was it to juggle between the two? And what was the difference between the two in terms of, is one the budget and one is something else, or is it?
I mean, you basically, with something like Benidorm, for example, it's probably the best one to take. You have your budget, and so you would basically work out, you've got the total budget, which is what ITV fund, but then you're looking at, okay, what am I going to spend in the UK and what am I going to spend in Spain? So it's almost split into two. It's almost, in some ways, it's split into three. You have the UK cost manager, the Spanish cost manager, and then you have the two combined to your total. So your UK cost manager, which is your sterling spend, effectively, is all of your crew, UK crew that you're bringing over to Spain, cast, anything like that. And then also, we would drive a lot of stuff over to Spain. We would find that certain things in Spain would actually be very expensive to get and actually cheaper to buy in the UK and ship over. So we would fill up this enormous truck with materials and equipment and ship it down there of everything that we'd need. So we found after a few series that actually it was cheaper doing these things in the UK and shipping it down. So you work out what you need to spend in the UK and what you're going to need to spend in Spain. Your Spanish cost manager is effectively, it's what you're going to spend in euros, and it's your hotels, it's your apartments, it's your Spanish crew that you have, it's per diems, and all things like that. And it effectively, it goes through what they call a production services company. So they, again, you say to them you give them an idea of what you are doing over in Spain, and what you're going to need, and they will put their own budget together of how much everything's going to cost, and you would incorporate that within your total overall budget. So it is literally just knowing, okay, what are we going to have that's English and what are we going to have that's Spanish? It's sort of effectively how it is, and nothing is really set in stone. So whereas you think, okay, this is all going to be English and this is all going to be Spanish spend, that's all done in prep, way before prep. Once you get into prep and you start locking things down and you start looking at things in a bit more detail, you might look at something and go, oh, hang on, no, we've got that as a euro cost. Actually, we're now going to get that equipment from England and bring that over. So there's a lot of chopping and changing. So whereas I did a lot of series of Benidorm, to begin with, it was very difficult to work all of that. It does get easier as the series go on, especially as something as established as Benidorm. Once you get to, series 2, 3 are quite tricky, but then when you go sort of 4 and onwards, everything settles down a lot more, because you already know at that point, right, okay, we know we're going to have to get that equipment from the UK. So actually things became easier as you're going along. And to be honest, what you're then having to deal with, the difficulties become just your daily filming troubles that you have.
And how often would you have to date a cost manager, and what would a cost manager include?
So it depends on the size of the show, quite honestly. With a factual entertainment show, first of all, you're updating and you're reporting. So, officially, on the smaller shows, smaller comedies, entertainments and factual shows, you would almost report monthly back to these things. As the show gets bigger, you almost get to the point where you have to do it weekly. So for something like Benidorm, you're almost constantly updating your cost report or cost manager, whatever you want to call it. You're sort of constantly updating it. You're doing what they call is forecasting, a lot of it. So you're sitting down with your line manager, line producer, and you're working out roughly what you think you're going to spend over the shoot. Okay, I think I'm going to need a location manager for this amount of shoot weeks, this amount of prep, and this amount of post. These are his rates, things like that. You would get budgets from your art department of, you give your art department a budget to spend for the shoots. They go through the script and they speak to the director, and they would bring up costings of what they think they're going to spend. If they think they're going to spend more, then between you and the line producer and director and people, you look at ways to maybe cut it down, or if need be, change the scripts to cut things down. But essentially you would need to, it's a constant update. You're always updating your cost manager with costs, with your spend, but also you're highlighting things like to your line producer, you're highlighting where you maybe have gone over. So for example, say you had a line in for additional camera equipment, for the shoot. Say that was, it's just an example of £5,000, but all of a sudden they've got more equipment in than you've got money in. It's your job to say, it's the production accountant's job to say to the line producer, hang on a second, we're going to go overspent there. We need to pull money from a different area. Have we got money from somewhere else that we can do to get this additional equipment? But ultimately, you're reporting back to the production company and also the channel on your spend and where you think you are. So it ultimately comes down to sort of a joint thing between me and the line producer on the reporting side of it. But ultimately, I am coming back to the production company and I'm saying, this is what we are going to spend in this shoot. This is where we are. And this is where I think we're going to go over, or this is where I think we're going to go under. And you would almost do a weekly report to the production company just as an update, and then a proper official one to the channel every month. But they become more regular depending on the size of the show.
What would happen if somebody went monumentally over? So if they went, 200 grand or something over their spend, who has to kind of step in and be like, no?
It can depend. There are different variables when it comes to that. That has happened plenty of times to me. If someone, say, for example, comes in 200 grand over, it can depend on the size of the production. So 200 grand over on a show that's £1 million is a huge amount. 200 grand over on something that's £35 million is a bit like, okay, well, that's not as much as we thought it was. But essentially, it is my job to report that overage as early as possible. It's not necessarily my job to solve it, but it's my job to report it as quickly as possible so decisions can be made. So ultimately, it's not my job to say to people where we can cut from. But if I have various savings that I'm aware of within the budget, areas I know that we are going to go underspent, I could say, okay, this person is going to go 200 grand over in budget. Say, for example, it's props. So the designer is predicting that they're going to go 200 grand over. Now, if the director and producer go, look, we really want these props. This is great. We really don't want to cut back on this because this overage that they're showing is also showing some great stuff that we're going to look fantastic on screen. We would then look at other aspects of the budget to see where we could take the money from. Is the second AD going to spend as much money in extras? Can we take it from there? Can we take money from, somewhere else, costume or makeup or even equipment, something like that? What you're doing is where you can take the money from. What you want to be careful of, though, is you are not saying no to things. You don't want to say constantly no. So it's that fine line of staying on budget and wanting to come in slightly under budget, maybe, but also not coming too under budget, because you don't want to have said no to something that would look fantastic on screen. You don't want to say, no, we can't afford that. We can't afford that. And then actually at the end of the production, you actually come in 200 grand under budget, and that you could have given the director that piece of equipment or that prop that he would have wanted, which would have made something look fantastic on screen. And actually you said no to it because you said you couldn't afford it. And now you look a bit of an idiot because you've come under budget. There is a fine line.
Have you ever come under budget where you're like, oh, we could have definitely got that piece of equipment in?
I haven't. No. Well, not particularly. No, I've never actually said no to anything. In fact, to be honest, most of the time when a production accountant says we can't afford it, no, they just ignore them anyway and just carry on. It ultimately, sort of going back to your other question, it ultimately comes down to the line producer, and even the production company to step in. If people aren't if you're over budget and people won't reduce costs, it will ultimately, I have seen it. I've seen CFOs at production companies step in and go to the head of production and go, right, you are X amount over budget. We are not funding that overspend. You need to cut things now, and they need to be cut. And I've seen heads of productions. I've seen various people step in and do these things, exec producers and stuff like that, step in and reduce these things. But have we ever said no to a piece of equipment and come in under budget? We've never actually said no. What did happen on a particular production is that we were under the impression from someone else that we were heavily over budget in particular areas, which we were led to believe that, yes, we were massively over budget. So we cut costs accordingly. Didn't really cut anything too major, but we cut down on things. We never really said no to anything because it was all in the studio mostly. But, we kind of let them have the director. When we came to the end of the shoot, It turned out that all of those costs that we were told that were going to come in didn't actually come in the end. So what ended up happening is we had a lot of extra money that we were told we were going to spend in the shoot. We didn't actually spend. What we did is, because we just started post, we let them have more money in post. So we were able to give them a little bit more equipment or some more toys to play with effectively in post. We were like, yeah, you want that sound booth for the day? Yours, take it. You want that bit of CGI? You can have it. So we didn't keep the money squirreled away, go, yes, it's ours, we can have it now. It's very much like, no, you want that production. No one ever wants to do that. No production company ever wants to squirrel money away and screw over the production. They want the production to be the best thing it could possibly be, because ultimately you want to get another series. You want to get more money in, which is getting another series. Squirreling away and keeping 100 grand doesn't help the production company, particularly if you don't get another series, because it looks rubbish. So yeah, if that had ever happened, then we would have always given it back to them within the post-production. Or even I've given more money people in music. When it comes to music clearances, they've had very little money, but actually we've said, you know what, you actually came under budget on the shoots. If you want to spend more money on music, you can now spend more money on music, which to them is great.
No, that's good.
You do have the same goal, even though you are the money man and you're seen as the person that says no to everything. You do have the same goal that you want to work on a program that looks fantastic.
Well, especially especially with you being in-house and the production accountant, you must start very early on. In a weird way, it's also your baby, because you're there from such an early stage till pretty much the last person to turn off the lights.
Exactly. You're completely right. With being in-house to being freelance, you'll much more see the production as your baby, because you're there from when the budget first goes in. You wouldn't do the budget yourself, but you are there from the first budget goes in right through to the very end. So you're not a freelancer that maybe leaves 4-8 weeks into post. You are the person doing it right to the very last penny is spent and everything has been delivered and it's done. You might be doing other productions at the same time as doing post, obviously, but yeah, it does very much become your baby. You're quite right about that. And I would find myself, you have this thing where you're like, stay away from my cost manager. It's my cost manager. Don't touch it. I spent a lot of time on this. I spent a lot of hours on this. Stay away from it. Leave it alone. It's mine. Yeah, you do have much more of that overview. But also I think I felt like you almost feel like you have more responsibility reporting back to the company as well. And I wonder if maybe some of my line producers felt that I was more loyal to the production company than I was to the production. Because I'd been at Tiger for such a long time, I ultimately felt that my reporting back to the company was more important sometimes. So you do have that thing that head of finance at Tiger was my boss, whereas on a production, a freelancer, normally their boss is the line producer. And yes, my boss is the line producer on a production, but ultimately my boss at Tiger Aspect was the head of finance there. So, there would be times though I would be feeding information back to him that ultimately be a freelancer wouldn't be feeding back, I think.
How come you wouldn't write up the first budget?
Say that again.
How come you wouldn't write up the first budget?
Generally, a production accountant doesn't normally get the budget sort of until it's all been agreed. Because effectively, you don't really have a production accountant on until everything's been agreed with the channel. Sometimes you wouldn't even have a production accountant on until a number of weeks into prep. Because I was in-house, I would be seeing the budgets a lot earlier than I would be normally. But essentially, how a production works within Tiger is that the idea for the program would come up and the execs and the development people would be coming up with ideas with the channel. And then once the channel is sort of interested, then the head of production at that company would start doing the budget and getting the budget agreed with the channel. Once that's agreed with the channel, you then start employing people effectively. And that's normally when the production accountant is brought on. So one of my jobs in my new company at Moonage is assisting my boss with doing budgets. So it's something that I did bits and pieces at Tiger, and actually later on in my career there was doing more and more. But within Moonage, it's something that I'll be doing more, is sort of assisting her with doing the budgets. So that's sort of my head of production finance role, is doing partly that. Yeah, so you've basically, when you're a production accountant, you're kind of given the budget once everything's been agreed with the channel. Finance is in place, the line producer's already been employed. And sometimes the line producer, I was in-house, but sometimes the line producer will already have someone that they want to work with. So, the producer has already been employed. The director has pretty much been employed. All of those key roles. It's like a head of production role, really. You're brought in and a couple of weeks into prep, effectively. So, yeah. So everything's already going when you see it.
You worked on another job, the second series of Fortitude, where they were based in the UK and Iceland.
Yes.
What was that like, stepping into the second series and sort of like taking over from somebody else who sort of effectively already set that up? From my understanding, they rented out not a studio, but like an office block and sort of turned it into a studio.
Yeah. So this is, when I did Benidorm, I wasn't able to do a couple of the series because I'd had kids and couldn't go out to Benidorm and do the series. And so I'd set it up. And I remember the production accountant that kind of took over for me for one of the series felt quite daunted because I'd been in that place and it had been my baby. So when you do take over something that someone else has started up, it's quite daunting because you don't know. You're almost having to live up to that person. So when I took over, when I did series 2 of Fortitude, I moved up from Benidorm to Fortitude, and it was kind of my first sort of big drama, effectively. Everyone sung the praises of the previous production accountant on series 1. So you had that nervousness where pretty much the entire same crew were coming back for series 2 that had been on for series 1, and they'd worked with this production accountant who all I heard was amazing things. Now, I was never told that I was a rubbish production accountant, but still you have that nervousness because you have an incredibly experienced co-producer who was fantastic. And yeah, you're kind of like, oh my God, he's done the series before. Everyone else has done the series before. And I'm coming in and this is my first big drama. Can I, and you have those doubts. It's like the first time I did Benidorm. I stepped in from doing series 1 after someone had done series 1 very well. And it's like, can you do it? And actually what I ended up doing with Fortitude was I knew the production accountant very well. She'd gone abroad and so couldn't do the second series anyway. And I took advice from someone else and I actually called her up and went and sat with her for a day and went through the production with her, went through all her spreadsheets and the different crew and just basically had a chat with her about it. And, we spent a whole day together going through Fortitude and how it was all done, which was incredibly beneficial. And in fact, I've had people do the same to me on Benidorm is, kind of sit with me and go through it. And so you can explain what people are like and so you can make sure that you're literally doing. And I think if you don't do that, I think you're silly not to do that. I remember the production accountant who did series 3 of Fortitude called me up and we had a good chat about how the previous series had gone. Fortitude was hard work, but in some ways, it's almost like, when you're going from comedy to drama, you're kind of given this idea that drama is a lot harder than comedy. It's a much harder genre to work in. I didn't really think that, to be honest, and I still don't think that. I think everything that you learn doing a sitcom, and especially something like Benidorm, really translate to drama. The only difference between comedy and drama is the money side of things. You put an extra, as I like to say, you put an extra 0 at the end of the problems. It's sort of what happens. You have exactly the same issues. Everything just costs a lot more money. Fortitude was this incredible production where, on series 1, they had taken over, they couldn't get a studio. So they had ended up taking over a commercial building next to West London Studios and soundproofing it and turning into this studio. So I've turned up on my first day at Fortitude and they've got 2 sound stages already downstairs with everything built. They left everything standing from series 1 to series 2. And then upstairs within the same sound stage, you had offices. So you had the art department, you had the costume and makeup, you had the production offices, AD's offices, producer and director offices, boardrooms, everything was there. So everything was contained in this one building. Even dressing rooms were in trailers in the car park outside. It was an incredible setup and possibly one of the best setups I think that I can think of that I've actually ever done, because it was just brilliant. You would come to work in the morning and essentially when you were in studio, it was pretty much like everyone would turn up, pick up their equipment and start filming. And at the end of the day, that's a wrap. you shut down filming. The hard part of Fortitude was filming in Iceland. Again, it's the overseas filming that you're doing. And again, like Benidorm, one of the hard parts of filming in Benidorm is when the sun doesn't shine and it decides to rain. The hard part of Fortitude is when it decides to snow. They had issues on series 1 with that, and we had issues on series 2. And one of my greatest memories of series 2 is Fortitude is sitting in with my co-producer, going through the budget, and all he's concentrating on is the webcam that he's looking out of Iceland, wondering why it isn't snowing it, and do we need to get truckloads of snow brought down from the top of the mountains.
With the Fortitude setup of it being in Iceland, was there 2 separate accounts teams, or was it just you heading it up from
London? Yeah. No, it was 2 accounts. So it's a bit different to Benidorm. So Benidorm, you do use a production services company like we used on Fortitude. It was a production services company. But ultimately in Benidorm, I was in control of the Spanish side as well, the Spanish costs as well. I had a Spanish accountant, but it was almost my assistant. So I was very much in control of everything, the overview of absolutely everything. And it's a slightly weird way of working with a production services company, but that's worked quite well. And the more series I did, the better it worked. I had a very good relationship with the production services manager. He was kind of starting up his company, and so that way it's worked quite well. With Fortitude, you are almost saying to the production services company, right, this is the stuff that we're going to film over there. They then come back with their costs and what they think, their own budget, and what it's going to take to build those sets, what the hotels are going to cost, what the flights are going to cost. Because also you're looking at various tax breaks as well, which is why you want it to go through a production services company in Iceland, because you've got to look at their tax breaks that you're trying to hit, the Icelandic tax breaks. So as the production accountant, I find that quite difficult because you want complete control over your own cost manager. Whereas for me, being quite controlling when it comes to the cost manager, I want complete control. But ultimately what you're doing is you're saying, right, here's a quarter of my budget. I'm giving it to you to spend, and you have to give me updates. First of all, they have to give you a budget of what they think everything's going to cost. Hopefully it's within the money that you are giving them. If it's more, you need to look at why it's more and do you need to cut down. And then you are relying on them reporting to you each week with their costs. So you can then take their costs and you can move it into yours to basically ultimately have the total cost of the production. And it's very, very daunting because on Fortitude, you would be filming in the UK. I had a great, really good team behind me in my account side and the production side. You know, I was really well supported by my team and the co-producer. So I felt that filming in the UK side was pretty, it was a lot of work. Don't get me wrong, it was a lot of work, but pretty good. And then all of a sudden they leave the UK and they go out to Iceland for 4 weeks. And you're almost at the mercy of the production services company that they're doing everything correctly. And it's very, very nerve-wracking. And it's not something I'm overly keen on in my controlling ways because you can't. Whereas, yes, you're asking them to report to you weekly about how much they're going to spend. And if they're going to go over on any little area, you need to know straight away because you have to solve it. And you're trusting them to give you that information. Now, so far, I've been incredibly lucky with the production services company they've used. We've used top production services people and they've been great. And we've not had that problem. And if we have had that problem, they have told us far in advance. So we've been able to solve that problem. But as a production accountant, you're trusting people with part of your budget, you know, and it's quite, it's not something I ever really got quite settled, to be honest, because you're still working away in the UK trying to get all of those stuff done. They're filming over in Iceland and you're basically relying on people to give you up-to-date information. It's not an easy one.
Was there any times where they were late handing in the sort of cost reporting and that made you a little bit more sort of like, oh, something might have gone wrong?
I'm trying to think. Offhand, no. We did have some issues to begin with, whereas, yes, it looked like to begin with they were going to go very much over budget, and we had to address that accordingly. But again, that was way before we went out to Iceland. The good thing about Fortitude is that you do spend your first sort of 6 weeks, I think, or maybe 8 weeks filming in the UK, and then you go out to Iceland. So you do have a good chunk of prep and a good chunk of filming in the UK before you go out to film in Iceland. So you do have plenty of time to sort everything out. So if they suddenly come to you and they go, we think we're going to go over budget, you've got plenty of time to deal with that. And we were able to deal with that. No, the guys in Iceland had worked on lots of different shows before. They had done series 1 of Fortitude. So if they had done badly on series 1, they wouldn't have been brought back for series 2. You know, the exec producer I was working with was an incredible exec and knew her stuff. And, you know, if she didn't feel comfortable, it's the same with Benidorm. If the production services company had been no good, then we wouldn't have used them again. I've worked on other jobs where we've gone out filming in Spain, only for a week here or there. And again, we've used a production services company who come highly recommended, and you trust those people to do it. And as part of your contract with them, it almost says in the contract that they need to report to you weekly, and they would expect it to be weekly. And if they weren't reporting to you weekly and you were getting nervous, well, you would fly out there and stand in front of them and get it done, basically. And I have been on productions where things are looking a bit dodgy and there's been a phone call and we've basically got the head of the production services company on the next flight over to the UK to basically sit with us and go through everything. Essentially, it's the broadcaster's money. We're responsible for making that show, so they answer to us. So it is vitally important that they give us that information. So no, I'd say I've been very lucky within that, and I haven't had those problems. Or if I have had problems, we've been able to sort them out. We've had them very early on, and we've been able to sort them out very early on.
Once you sort of get on to bigger budget shows, you probably need to build a good team around you. What is it that you look for when you're hiring people to sort of join you?
It's an interesting one because I've had a slight mixture of people. My first ever assistant I had was when I worked in Benidorm. I'd never had an assistant before that. And the thought of passing work over to someone seemed a little bit weird to me. It's like, well, surely I can do it. In Benidorm, there was a huge amount of work, but I needed someone that could take care of the Spanish side. So the production services company have their own accountants that they do everything, but I needed some help with the Spanish payroll, making sure I claimed Spanish VAT back correctly and things like that. So it was almost like she was my assistant, but she was almost the Spanish accountant, really. It wasn't until I did, I think Fortitude was probably the first time really that I had a team around me. Now you're given in the budget roughly how many people that you need. Ultimately, the first time I went back to people that had worked on the first series. Unfortunately, they couldn't do it. But I then, not having assistants before, there's a very good system out there. You know, the Guild are brilliant at recommending people, and people put their CVs on at the Production Guild. There's also very good things like Facebook groups and stuff like that. And the sort of thing I look for when I'm looking for assistants is, I think a lot of the time I've gone off recommendations from people. So, for example, on Fortitude, I had 3 assistants. I had 2 assistant accountants and a cashier. Now, one of the things I was told when I came onto Fortitude was that I needed a art department accountant, someone solely working on the accounts for the art department. That was something they needed in the first series, so I was told that was something that I definitely needed. Now, again, I was really lucky on that because there was a production accountant who was a very experienced production accountant who was about to hopefully going to do a second series at a Tiger production, but there was a bit of a gap. So they wanted to give her some work, so they kept hold of her. So the thought was, okay, well, we can get her in to be the art department accountant, and then during the shoot, she will leave and I will find someone else, and she will go on to the second series of this program they wanted her to do. Unfortunately for Tiger, the second series unfortunately didn't happen. But fortunately for me, it meant that I had this incredibly experienced person doing the art department accounts for me. And so I was lucky, and I had her as sort of my back. If I wasn't sure about anything or if I was questioning anything, she was sort of there to help me. Other assistants that I got, my sort of first assistant, I reached out for some CVs and I got a few CVs through. And one of the CVs I got was someone that seemed to fit the bill of knowing payroll and purchase orders and paying invoices and stuff like that, knew that stuff very well. He had worked with someone I had worked with and I was very good friends with, and I called her up, and her response to me was, the best thing you can do is hire this person, which was sort of the recommendation. Do you know what I mean? It was a very good friend of mine and sort of the recommendation. So quite honestly, I put him in for an interview, but as far as I was concerned, the recommendation from her was as good as you've already got the job.
Yeah.
You know, I was looking for a cashier. I had trouble finding a cashier, and that came from the Guild. And you know, cashiers seemed to work out okay. You know, cashiers a lot of the time are people that are trying to get into production or get into production accounts. So it's a sort of junior/runner role. And again, I was very lucky. You know, wasn't I, Rob?
No comment. No comment on that one.
So yeah, and in fact, my first assistant, who came recommended by this friend of mine, she actually ended up stealing him off me when she got some big movie. The first thing she did was come and nick him off me, and it's kind of then followed through from that. I've sort of gone assistants I've needed carrying on from that. Benidorm, I did so well in my Spanish assistant that I basically employed her for every single series that I did out there. And for the series I didn't do, I basically said to the production accountant that came on, this is your assistant. Don't worry about looking for anybody else because this is the person you need. When it came to doing other dramas where I needed an assistant or other comedies, I went from people that Tiger have used before, or a lot of the time I've gone on recommendations. It really has been recommendations. So when I came to doing Curfew, where it was an even bigger job, I needed an art department accountant, a cashier, and 3 assistants. So it was sort of me and 5 assistants basically on it. I think 3 of them came from recommendations from people I knew who had worked up in Manchester. And then 1 other person was my art department accountant on Fortitude, who I still knew very well. And I basically said to her, are you available at the moment? Would you like to come and be an art department accountant on this production? She wasn't doing anything and the money worked for her. And so for me, it was great. I was able to bring her onto this production. The good thing about with your assistants is that once you get someone that you like and you trust, you pretty much try and have that person as much as possible. I think it's fantastic, especially with someone like an art department accountant who you can literally leave to get on with their job. And then you just need to sit down with them once a week and go through everything. It's worth their weight in gold. It really is.
You, I want to sort of move on to your new role now, where be a production accountant on jobs, or do you want to stay more in-house where you're kind of building stuff from the ground up?
I think, yeah, I mean, one of the things I want to do is build from the ground up, be more on within the office. I think that's more sort of family wise, but also I'd been doing production accounts for sort of over 15 years. I'd been out on location a lot, very long days and all sorts of various things. And I kind of was just getting a bit worn out of being on production. I definitely think you can get worn out after a while, and taking a step back and being more office based and not having to go to Benidorm or Manchester or stuff like that for long periods of time and working incredibly long hours, because I find myself when I do go away, work away, I work longer hours because I just want to. That sort of happens. But one of the things about my job, because it's a smaller company, there is still that production account side of my job that I will still be doing. For example, when the production is first in prep, before the production accountant comes on, I will still be doing a little bit of the production accountant's work. I will be overseeing the production accountant, essentially when they're on the production. So they'll be reporting to the line producer, but also reporting to me. The whole point of my job is so that my boss can concentrate on running the company and getting in the commissions, and I can help with the day-to-day running of the productions, so she doesn't need to get bogged down in various little bits and pieces of productions. But also when the production comes to an end and you're in post and the production accountant doesn't have a huge amount to do, but there's still work to be done, I would now be taking that on as well. So I think the answer is yes, I will still be doing some production accountant work. It's going to be in the prep and the post side of things and more of an overview during the shoot. But yeah, I think it's almost a waste not to use that production account side of my job. And it's something I still enjoy. I didn't not enjoy being a production accountant. I loved it. I just wanted to sort of be in the office a bit more.
When you're sort of now in your new role, you'll start doing budgets and budgeting for shows. How do you know what's going to cost what? Do you break down the script and read through it, or is that your boss who does that? And then they're just like, well, I think it roughly might be this, or you might need this.
Okay, so the one I've just done, the budget I just did for her actually, which she still has to go through, so it could be a load of rubbish. What I've done, she might throw it back at me and go, what the hell are you thinking? But essentially with that one, the scripts aren't written because it's still in development, but we need to have an idea of how much things are going to cost. So what I have is I have the pitch document, and I have almost a 6-page overview of what the production's going to be about, and what in the development guys' heads of how many episodes and how many hours per episode. So is it 6 1 hours, or it's 6 half hours, or something like that? What my boss has also said to me is, right, this is the price that we're going for, and this is the price. Broadcasters have their own price, for a particular genre of what you're looking for per hour. It's like the BBC has a set amount for dramas and factual and stuff like that of what you're costing to. So you sort of know the amount of money you need to get to. You're looking back when you're doing a budget, you're looking, so I know, okay, it's 6 1 hours. Each episode is relating to a particular, maybe a different time period. So say it's a time travel thing, for example. You're like, okay, well, episode 1 and 2 are set in the 60s. Episode 3 and 4 are set in the 80s. So you know that you're almost splitting out the budget in different ways and how it's going to be filmed. And so what you're doing is you're looking at a rough idea of the schedule. You're looking at the pitch document that you've been given, and you're looking at the guide price that you've been told to work to. So say, for example, my boss said to me, this is just an example, say to me, right, we're looking at an idea that this is going to cost about £20 million to make. Like, right, okay, well, at least I've got an idea. So I would go through and I would work out what I think the production needs, and then try and get that to around that sort of £20 million figure as an idea. It's never an exact science, almost, because scripts change. And ultimately, one of the first things you do as a production accountant when you get that budget is that budget might have been done a number of months ago. So you then need to completely change everything. Because originally it might have been budgeted that you were going to be in location for the entire shoot. And then all of a sudden it's decided, right, we're going to go to studio for the entire shoot. So you would have to play around with figures like that. So you're basically going on information. But then also, that's sort of the ones that I've done. But I do know that there are other budgets that are done when it comes to the script. So you would, depending on the show, you can sometimes have the script beforehand, and then the channel says, right, give us a budget, and you then break that budget down as per the scripts that you've been given.
What I was going to ask as well, when you're doing budgets for certain shows, is it true that they sometimes have like a episode where they just have it based in one room to sort of cut down the budget on that episode to then move the money to another episode?
You mean my dream? I always begged various. I used to have a running joke with a particular writer and also some producers about this. So when you're a production accountant and you are stressing about money quite heavily because they're spending all of their money on the first few episodes, and you're like, oh my God, can we do one episode please with 2 people sitting in a room? If you've ever seen an episode of a TV program like that, sometimes that's the reason why. I don't think I've been on shows where we've overspent on maybe the first block, because they want the first couple of episodes to be as explosive and as amazing and fantastic as possible. But then what happens is it's the production accountant's job to turn around and go, yeah, you spent all of your money. You had 1.5 million in fees for that particular thing, and you spent £1 million on block 1. You don't have anything, and all of a sudden everything gets scaled down. I haven't had 2 people sitting in a room. I have definitely suggested it and begged for it. I don't think scripts are particularly written like that. I think that normally scripts will be rewritten to fit with that when they suddenly realize. And there are shows that I know, not necessarily shows in this country, but I know of TV shows where you've seen particular episodes where there might only be 2 people or 1 person in a particular location for the entire episode. And that is, you can pretty much guarantee that is because they've run out of money, or they want to have, the director has to make a decision. He's basically been told, if you want to have that explosive finale, you've got to cut down somewhere else. So I have worked on shows where we've had to cut down on stuff, but never had that 2 people in a room talking to each other for the entire episode.
Oh, okay. So that's sort of your dream at the moment.
That has been my dream on various productions, when you're pulling your hair out going, how the hell are we going to afford everything? And then it's like, well, and I've made that suggestion a couple of times to writers who laugh at me because it's not what they want to do.
Well, it is interesting when you do, because I was talking to another accountant about that, and they were like, yeah, when you see it, that means they've run out of money, so they had to do it like this. And then sometimes you think, but what happens if it was just a good idea? It's like, no, I guarantee you it's a money thing. It's like, oh, okay.
I guarantee you it's a money thing because, well, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but as far as I know, there's very few scripts out there where, unless it's the whole idea of the TV program in the first place, I don't think there's very many shows out there where the writer would halfway through go, do you know what? We're just going to have two people sitting in a room having a chat with each other for the entire episode. That doesn't really, I could be completely wrong. But for me, I've never seen original scripts like that or had ideas like that. These things only normally come about when you're a quarter of the way into the shoot and they're massively overspent because they want an explosive beginning. And you are like, you've got to cut down. You've got to cut down on stuff. So if you want that ending, you need to cut down on this. Or you cut down on things in post. You can't have that amount of CGI. You can't have that amount of music and stuff like that. You have to make concessions. You still, at the end of it all, as I think sometimes people forget within TV, you want to make a good TV program, but you still need to make money on it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Well, for something like TV, because with film, a lot of it is based on sort of DVD sales and the first few weeks in the cinemas and how long they can run for. How does a TV show make money if it's broadcasting something like BBC?
Yeah, I mean, in the old days, it was very much merchandise, DVDs, things like that, but obviously, yeah, the end has fallen out. When you think about shows like Tiger used to do Mr. Bean and things like that, the DVDs and the worldwide sales were huge. Even things like, which I never actually worked on, but things like Little Britain, for example, you think about the merchandise and stuff like that. It's a huge, huge money maker. And the DVD sales were enormous, but those things don't happen anymore. So actually making a TV program essentially doesn't really make the production company a huge amount of money. I think people who work in production or actually work on shoots have this idea that production companies are making huge amounts of money out of a TV program, when on some TV programs, they make very, very little on the show. And I'm never, not sort of my area of expertise, but generally at the moment, what is making the money is repeating series, format sales is a big thing, and overseas sales. So you want to try and get that show and you want to sell it to America or somewhere else. Or, for example, in terms of entertainment, you want to be able to sell that format. So Britain's Got Talent, Deal or No Deal, those sorts of things, those sorts of very simple game shows that Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is a great one. Those very straightforward, simple game shows, which actually are sold to different production companies around the world, and you make a lot of money from them. If you can even come up with a sitcom idea that you can possibly sell the format, The Office is a great one. If you think about that, I never worked on The Office, but it's a sitcom that only did 2 series in this country, but it was a sitcom that did 10 series in America, I think it was 9 or 10, of not just 6 episodes, but 20 odd episodes a series. And other countries as well have made their own versions of The Office, and I have worked on other shows where they've tried to do that particular format in a different country, and maybe it's worked, maybe it hasn't worked. But I would say a lot of the super indies, and especially as an Endemol thing, for example, Endemol, who own Tiger Aspect, if you look at possibly, again, I don't want to, hopefully I'm not wrong about saying this, but if you look about a lot of their money is format sales, the format sale of Big Brother and things like, I think Deal or No Deal is one of Endemol's companies. It's all about the format sales and the overseas sales now.
How certain shows translate into other countries, and then there's others where it's just completely bombs.
Yeah,
which is quite interesting to see. I guess what I also want to ask, now that you have COVID in place and everything that's stopped, how hard would it be in the future for you to sort of do your job?
I think, as we were sort of having a chat about earlier, it's, I've just come into this role as head of production finance at Moonage, which is a job that I really wanted to do, and with a great team and a great new production company. And I was very excited, and there for, I think, 2 months, just under 2 months. And then all of a sudden, just as I'm starting to get my feet under the table and work out what I'm there for, and they had a very large production already in production that was coming to the end, but I was sort of helping to prep and work out tax credits and budgets and things like that on a new production. And then all of a sudden, the entire industry shut down. One day everything was going ahead and the next day, nothing. It's quite daunting. I went from doing tax and cash flows and things like that, basically, to working out how to furlough people. And I probably spent the first 8 weeks of being in lockdown just literally trying to furlough as many crew as I could possibly get furloughed on our productions, and dealing with the minefield that has become with HMRC. I mean, they made things incredibly difficult, but I think part of that was, it's a completely unprecedented thing to have happened before. It just made things really hard work. Doing furloughing people is not what I wanted to do. I'm sure people don't want to be on furlough. They want to be working. They don't want me furloughing them either. But, it's incredibly important that we try and get as much money out of crew as possible. These freelancers have completely had their jobs taken away from them. But it's also, now that's kind of been done and I was excited to get back onto other stuff. We're now hopefully slowly coming out of things, but we're now trying to, not necessarily me, but we're trying now to start filming again on something that was postponed. And we're trying now to start filming again towards the end of July on something. And it's literally having to completely redo the budgets and the cash flows and all the tax calculations, because now we've had to up all our costs to make sure that we are completely covered for anything COVID related. The amount of money that we've had to put aside for testing and other crew members for COVID things is sort of huge. So it's definitely not so much for me. I think my boss is probably even more stressed about it than I have been. She's been the one on all the various phone calls regarding and various meetings about how we even think about starting up again. I mean, yes, there are a lot of guidelines being issued, but I don't really think until we start filming that everything's going to be, it's a completely unknown thing. Until you start filming, you're not really going to know. You could start filming and find out that absolutely everything is a complete disaster and it's impossible to not have the virus going around. Hopefully that won't happen. And we have one of the best industries in the world, I think, in this country of TV and film. That's why so many people come over here and film over here, because we have the equipment and the personnel. So we have to start filming again. We have to get back to where we were, but we have to be able to do it safely. And it's going to be an interesting time when we do start filming to see how everything goes. I think it's going to take a while. It will get back there in the end, but it's incredibly nerve-wracking being in a job. And as I said, I'm one of the lucky ones. I really am, and I count myself very lucky during this that I've had a lot of work to do. And I feel heartbroken for some of those people that I've not been able to furlough, who were earning very good money on the job that they were on, but have essentially from one day to the next have their whole entire career pulled away from them. And even, I've been speaking to people whose wives are also in production. So they've both lost their careers. And for whatever reason or not, I'm not able to furlough them for a particular loophole that they've been caught in. Or not a loophole, a particular, problem that's happened, and I can't furlough them. And it's just awful. So I think everyone is as keen as possible to get back to filming, but obviously it's got to be done safely. And it's very difficult time at the moment, but we'll get back there, and hopefully I can stop dealing with COVID stuff and get back to helping to get productions off the ground again, which is what everyone wants to do. No one wants to be talking about COVID stuff. Everyone wants to be doing their normal jobs of making TV shows, which is the exciting part.
I'm kind of slowly itching to sort of get back. I feel like I'm retired at the moment.
I mean, one of the things I hope that comes out of this, I don't want to speak out of turn. I think something I mentioned earlier, I do think sometimes people in TV have this idea that I personally feel that some people in TV are very well paid. I don't think everybody in TV is very well paid, but I do think some people have very good perks and do very well out of it. And I think some people don't actually realize how well they've got it working in TV. I wouldn't name names and I wouldn't say any particular roles in particular, but that's being a production accountant and having worked in an office and being the production accountant. I do have this idea that people in TV don't understand sometimes how lucky they are. I have had people as a production accountant, for some reason or other, we couldn't get catering that day for some particular reason. The idea that they have to go out and buy their own lunch or go and get their own lunch, to some people is, I'm not even talking about cast, I'm talking about crew, is an idea in their head that is completely like what? I have to go and get my own lunch. And I've had those kind of reactions. And I'd like to think that out of all of this, people will be a bit more appreciative of the jobs that they have within TV, but it doesn't take people long to forget. Yeah, but yeah, hopefully everything will be back to normal.
I like to end the podcast on letting the guest have an opportunity to ask me 2 questions.
Ask you 2 questions.
Yeah, so the floor is yours. And
you could have told me this one before and not put me on the spot like that.
No, that's the whole point. I think it makes it a little bit more interesting to sort of, put you on the spot and just let's see what comes to your mind.
I think one of the things, because I know you quite well, I worked with you before. I think, do you ever see that? I think sometimes when you are working as a production accountant or in the production office, you almost have, it feels like sometimes the production side, they have a them and us. And I've been on productions where this has been very true. You have a them and attitude to the production. So as someone that's maybe worked on the floor as well, do you find sometimes that maybe the production office, not just the production account side, but the production office as a whole is kind of looked at as this demon office that's constantly trying to screw people over with money, is things I've been accused of before, screw people over on their budgets or things like that. Do you ever feel sometimes that there is a them and us attitude when it comes to productions?
I think yes and no. I think what comes down to it is people actually understanding other people's roles.
Yes,
and
very good point.
Because for somebody, let's just say if somebody works on set and then they talk to somebody in the office, and they're like, "You need to pay me, so all you need to do is press a button." It's kind of like actually there's more to it than pressing a button to get somebody paid. What's the word? There's processes for people to get paid and for stuff to be confirmed. And I think sometimes people forget about that. And because when people are getting paid with money and everything, because money is always going to be a sensitive subject with people, I think people kind of speak out of turn that they don't mean to. And I think sometimes the attitude, not everybody, but an individual might attitude that a individual will sort of take is, I'm going to go in like a bull in a china shop. I'm just going to make as much mess and noise as possible, rather than actually talk out what problem, what has happened.
Exactly. No, I completely agree with you.
And it does create awkwardness as well, because then then it becomes this them and us attitude of actually, this person didn't want to do this for me, so now I'm going to be at war with them, so I'm going to do this. When sometimes it's just, listen, it might not even be that person's fault, but it hasn't been done. It could be something that's stuck further down the chain, or it hasn't been signed off. Or sometimes it can be actually you're at fault because you didn't give all the paperwork, or you've given incomplete paperwork. Mm-hmm. And then it's just a bit like, oh, okay. You kind of leave them a bit red-faced because they're just, they're embarrassed for coming in like that.
I totally agree. One of the things I found on production is that I'm not saying that anyone's jobs on set isn't harder. I look at people on set, and there are certain jobs on set that I would never, ever want to do, and I take my hat off. There are certain people I look at and I think, I don't actually think I could ever do that job. I really don't think I could ever do it. And I really take my hat off to a lot of people. But I ultimately think there are some people that have no idea the amount of work and paperwork that goes into making a show. I always remember one of the times I was on Benidorm, and we would go out a month before we started filming to set up the production office out in Spain. We'd be doing prep in the UK, but then we would fly out to Spain 4 weeks before filming. So about maybe even a couple of days before we started filming, we would fly certain crew out. Those people that were needed at the last minute, they would start flying out. And I always remember a particular department member, was an assistant, wasn't the head of department, sort of, saying to me, "Oh, how long have you been out in Benidorm already?" And I would say, 4 weeks. And the answer came back was, "Why the hell do you need to be out here for 4 weeks already? What are you doing?" Like that. And it's that thing of, you just have no idea how much work goes into just the smallest of things. The smallest of even just a tiny location change, can cause a ridiculous amount of work for everything.
if you're abroad, because there must be so much more. There's probably double the amount of work because you're somewhere. You're kind of in uncharted waters in terms of if you're going in to set up, if you have a service company or not, because there'll be things that you won't think of that will happen, and then.
There's the thing with production. That's the thing with production and production accounts is whatever happens, as much as you prepare for everything, be expected for something to happen. Something will happen on a production. You can be going nice and smoothly and everything's hunky-dory and wonderful. And you're like, yeah, this is a breeze. If it's going to go wrong in a production, it will go wrong in a production. I've always found that's always the way. I think one of the things as well is we were just saying that people don't quite get how much as a production accountant your hands are tied to certain things. So as in, you cannot budge when it comes to HMRC rules regarding how people are paid, or even the production company's rules on how people are paid and how things are done. So whereas people will think that you are being incredibly difficult at times, and I've had people say to me, well, I'm going to go and have to speak to the director if you won't do this for me. And my answer to that one has been, well, these are HMRC rules. These aren't the director's rules or my rules. This comes from the government. Like, you might be having a go at me, go and have a go at the government. So you are looked at as that horrible person that's saying no to somebody. I remember recently I had to tax someone's per diems, but that's because HMRC changed the rules. And they're literally looking at you as like, you are the worst person in the world. But I'm kind of going, what can I do?
Yeah, my hands are tied.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the second question. Would you ever be, because this is about production accounts and stuff, have you ever been interested in being sort of production accountant as yourself, or is having worked with me and others perhaps decided, no, that's not the role I want to do? And if not, why not?
I think it's kind of hard. I think it's slightly hard to answer, but I think at the same time, at the moment, answer is no. And I think that's kind of comes down to certain things that need to be dealt with and people that I've worked with. What I think is quite important as well as being a freelancer is working with the right people and learning things on the job. So I know there's been some jobs where it's just been an absolute nightmare, and it's kind of hard, even though it's kind of hard to take positives from it, and it slightly takes you off the tracks on what you want to do and puts you off a little bit. And I know not every job's the same, and being a freelancer, you have the beauty of, okay, well, you're only working with these people for a certain amount of time. You probably will never see them again, or if you do, you kind of say hello, politely say hello and then move on, sort of thing. And it just kind of ignore them. At the moment, no. I think at the moment the career path is slightly different. Would I go back to accounts? I think it depends on who sort of asks and what I'm going to take away from it.
I think you're right. It could definitely be the person that you're working with sometimes. It could be that you might not be the career that you want to do, but actually if you've worked with someone before and you actually really like them and the sort of money is okay, well then actually sometimes you'd be like, well, yeah, I'll go back and do that again.
Yeah, it's also in a weird way that you want to feel slightly inspired at work when you're working with certain people. And when you see how certain people's work ethics are or how they deal with situations is what you should kind of not want to aspire to, but something that you want to sort of pick up on. If somebody is, like for example, on Fortitude, when I had to basically query somebody's receipts, and when I spoke to you about it, you said, oh, well, because of who they are, we're going to let something like this slide, but if a bigger thing pops up, then we all need to sort of battle on it.
Fighting your battles, picking your battles is definitely something you have to do on production with certain people.
Yeah, and I've kind of taken that rule onto other jobs, because there are certain things you let slide because you don't really know you don't know how much knowledge that person has in their role. But then if somebody does it again, or if there's something bigger, then you can just push back on it.
That's very much, it's quite interesting because that's something I learned from, I've been incredibly lucky to work with some great line producers over the years. And I used to let, especially my early years of Benidorm, I used to let the smaller things really stress me out a lot and worry and get annoyed about the smaller things. And it was all very much, the line producer on that was like, no, we're going to pick our battles. Don't worry about that. And this is very much the producer as well on Fortitude, who I have a huge amount of respect for. and he is very much like right, we're going to let that slide. We won't worry about that. But, because if you say no to everything, then ultimately you just get classed as that difficult person. But if you're saying yes to some things and then you say no to the expensive thing or the really bad thing, then actually you're not so bad. You're like, hey, look, I gave you that, but you got this. And there's a lot of that with production accounts. It's like, yeah, you can have that, but you can't have that, sort of thing. Yeah. I mean, it's weird because I loved it.
Because when I worked on a particular job where it was very difficult and it just felt like just like a backlog of problems and things going wrong, it always made it sort of difficult to sort of want to go to work, and you kind of just become not a zombie, but you just sort of be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm just going to stick to, rather than want to pick things up. Because then, if you do want to take work off somebody else, you kind of look back behind the curtain of like, actually, wow, this is even worse than I thought, and now I'm stuck with doing this for someone. And I know that sounds quite selfish, but
no, you want to be inspired and you want to go into work. It's one of those things that if you're working with people that you don't particularly care for or get on with, it makes the job unenjoyable. It's like anything, those productions where I've got on well with the team, it's great. It's, you look forward to going in the morning. As I said before, I've been incredibly lucky. I've had some great assistants and I've had some really good line producers and production teams that I've worked with very closely. And I would, and there's people that I've worked with and someone says to me, oh, would you like to do this production? And I'm a bit like, and they've told me the particular line producer. And I'm like, yes, I'd love to, because I love working with that person. And it's, you enjoy going into work every morning. There's other productions I've done where I'm not so keen on the line producer, and there's times I've probably said no to the odd production here or there because of a particular line producer or someone like that, and I'm just like, I just don't want to go into work and work for that person every day. Doesn't make it enjoyable. As I can say, that's probably happened out of my entire career once, twice perhaps. I've been very, very lucky that I've worked with some very, very nice people, and also some very knowledgeable people that I've taken a lot from.
Great. Well, Alex, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Make sure you stay safe. Stop buying your kids Fortnite stuff, because it's going to bankrupt
It definitely will bankrupt me. It's something for them to do during lockdown though. So yes, lovely. Thank you, Rob.
No problem. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate and review this podcast, and tune in next week to our season finale, where we'll have Matt Walker dropping by to talk about directing.